Oregon 32, Ohio State 31. Instant classic, 5 Chalai classic. It was our second 5 Chalai rating of the year. Alabama versus Georgia was the only other one, and we were on the field for that one as well. This was such a pleasure to be a part of. I've been up there once before. It was for the UCLA game a couple of years ago. That was good experience. This was an instant classic. This is one the entire country was watching last night. Do you remember back in spring? Remember we did a segment on Oregon, and it was one of those things before media days happened, when I knew everyone was going to ask Dan Lanning, and they were going to ask Jed Fish, and they were going to ask Lincoln Riley, and they were going to ask all these new coaches, how do you adjust to the Big Ten? And truthfully, I didn't care about how the rest of them answered, because I thought there may be one Big Ten championship contender coming in the door, and that was Oregon. Oregon had a decent shot to just outright win the conference in their first year. And so in advance of all that, how's Oregon going to adjust to the Big Ten conversation, we kind of just made sure it was stated on this show, the Big Ten's going to have to adjust to Oregon every bit as much as Oregon's going to have to adjust to the Big Ten. And then we got to hit the fast forward button, and here we are, October 12th, last night, Eugene, Oregon. Epicenter of the college football universe yesterday, and there were some big games yesterday. I don't think any of them was played at this level. That game yesterday, that game last night, felt like a game that was being played at a different level than any other game I watched yesterday, and I watched all the rest of them on the flight home this morning. You got to understand something. For a long time, Oregon's been relevant. For a long time, at varying points, Oregon's won. They won under Mike Bellotti. They won under Chip Kelly. They've won before. They played for a national title under Chip Kelly. But the thing about it is, you know as well as I do, if you're a little bit older, like if you're not in college, if you've been around the block a few times and you've watched college football, you know that when I mention Oregon, you think of uniforms. But when I mention Oregon and them succeeding, you always thought of gimmick. You always thought of them being able to take the backup options for the big schools and funnel them into an offense and a specified way of doing things that ended up leveraging their strengths while maybe limiting the exposure of their weaknesses. But it was all basically smoke and mirrors because we can't recruit heads up with the big boys out east because we're not out east. That was Oregon football for a long time. Here's why last night's so important. It proved to you that a lot of what they've been preaching up there in the Pacific Northwest is true. Now, I don't think Dan Lanning and his staff learned a ton about their team last night that they didn't already know. I think America probably learned a fair amount about the fact that they can go grind over gimmick now. It's not a situation where Oregon, when they face a team like Ohio State, has to gimmick their way, has to run around you. In other words, they could run through you. They could go through you because they're built from the inside out. Folks thought that couldn't happen in Oregon. It's happened. And if you doubted it, I know many people did, and it was fair for you to doubt it because your eyes really haven't seen it yet. In fact, you watched Washington run through them last year, and it crept a lot of doubt back into people's minds. If you had the doubt, I think it was silence last night. Now, that's not to mean that a definitive result was delivered. This is a one-point win. Both of these teams are extremely good. I think they're the two best teams in the Big Ten. We'll talk about that more later and how it doesn't really matter because we'll have games on the field. But the result matters a great deal. And it would still matter if Ohio State kicked a game-winning field goal last night. It would matter because you will have watched Oregon go toe-to-toe physically. You will have watched them win at the line of scrimmage, even if they lost on the scoreboard. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I was up there Thursday night. I was around them all day Friday. And I think it's really important, because Lanning talked about it in the postgame as we get into this thing. It's really important to know that along with being able to lean on grind over gimmicks, they also did not think they had to really do anything extraordinary here. In other words, they thought their best was good enough. They didn't really think they needed to land multiple haymakers. They just thought, hey, man, if we just keep jabbing, that's good enough. Like, we don't have to be 120% of ourselves here. We're good enough if we play our A-, A+ game. I think they did last night. I think it was good enough. So you notice something whenever you're at these big games. We're at one every weekend. You notice that everybody's energized. Jesse Collin, I don't remember the last time I went to a game where I came back the next day and I told you guys, boy, man, Georgia just wasn't really energetic. Boy, Texas, man, they lacked energy. No one lacks energy in these big games. Sometimes you may see a team look lethargic when they're favored by 24.5, but nobody looks lethargic in these big games. Energy has never been in short supply at Oregon either. But I'll tell you what was in short supply last year in a couple of big moments. I'll tell you what's been in short supply for Ohio State in some of these big moments occasionally is execution. Execution is what wins. It's not the most motivated or energized team. It's the team that executes. Now, this is no breaking news, but it's a big deal because Oregon got out executed at times last year, namely 2 of them, and they toted an L as a result of it. And it ate at that staff, and it eats at that program. And so now you get another shot. That's the beautiful thing about playing at high levels of college football. You're going to get several shots per year, and this was their shot. And I think it was a real growth spot for the Oregon program because not only are you energized, and not only does everyone look like they snorted pre-workout before the game, everybody looks like that on that team, but they executed. You got Dylan Gabriel playing his best football at the biggest moment. You went and got Evan Stewart out of the portal, and he played his best football. Stewart went off last night. 7 catches, 149 yards, and a touchdown. Gabriel, same thing. I mean, last time I saw him play like that was in the Red River game against Texas last year, and he had thrown some picks. He had some ugly moments against Michigan State. What did we say last week? It was kind of in a low-key way good to get that stuff out of the way before the Ohio State game, not because there's this finite amount of mistakes one can make, but if one makes mistakes in the lead up to the big game, it just puts all the more emphasis on execution. And they played like a team last night that was razor focused, super intense, but they executed. Offensive line allowed 7 sacks in the first 2 games. Oregon's offensive line early this year was a mess, partly due to injury. They gave up 7 sacks. They gave up none last night. In fact, they've given up none for a couple of weeks now. They allowed only 2 tackles for loss. And mind you, this is against an Ohio State defensive front that returned a ton of talent. This is an Ohio State defense, supposed to be the best in the country. And they kind of low-key, not so low-key, actually got it taken to them last night. Hanging 32 on that team and also leaving some points on the board. It's a big deal. There's an age-old adage that good defense will always beat good offense, and used to be true. It's not so true anymore. There's a certain level, the freeze point, as we call it on this show, there's a certain level that offenses, if they function at, will score against any defense in the country. I don't care if they're number 1 by 10 miles. There is a certain caliber of athlete, a certain layer of scheme, and a certain level of execution that if you get in today's college football with today's rules, you will not stop. You will not shut it down. Now, they may not hang 50 or 60 on you, but they're getting 30 minimum. And Oregon got theirs last night and missed a field goal and had a turnover on downs down there inside the red zone. So could have been more. Credit Ohio State for it not being more. But Oregon kind of took it to Ohio State's defense. They had 8 plays of 25-plus yards. In fact, why don't we pop the paper? I think that's kind of a paper popper stat. Had nearly 500 yards total offense. They had 4 scoring drives of 60-plus yards. And Evan Stewart, Tez Johnson had a good game. Jordan James had a good game. I thought Evan Stewart, in many ways, kind of put the exclamation mark on this game because when you're watching a wide receiver take over a game, I think everyone, if I told you one was going to do it in this game, would have circled Jeremiah Smith, and he had himself a good game too. But Evan Stewart, after not popping on the national radar so far this year, this is the moment you want that stuff to happen. Each of them, Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson, had 7 catches apiece. In fact, I would say you take those 2, Egbuka and Smith are probably another 2 on the other side. You probably had 4 receivers in this game that would qualify as wide receiver 1 on any other Big Ten roster and most rosters in college football, which is, again, why I tell you it's pretty clear whether you're watching on TV or you're in the stands or you're watching on the field. I mean, how do you not get the feeling I'm watching a game played at a little bit different level here? Consensus, like easily top 5 caliber teams. For all we know, we were watching the best 2 teams in the country. Best 3, best 4, whatever you want to go, whichever route you want to go there. But I'll tell you what else it was. It was a huge program game, but it was a huge staff game for Oregon. You know, the different kind of relationships you have in my walk of life, the different relationships you have kind of spiderweb out into all different parts of sports, all different parts of college football. So you've got your buddies, you've got current players on some teams, you have a ton of coaches, you have agents, and you also have people who work for search firms and people who help staff programs. And it's always fun during these games because when you're talking to coaches and you're talking to agents and search firm folks, they don't talk about the players as much as they talk about the coaches. That's just what they're more interested in. And so it's always about coaching matchups. And some of the best feedback I get about coaching matchups is just in those little group texts. And last night during this game, one of the big things people wanted to see is, they wanted to see Dan Lanning versus Ryan Day, but that's almost a splintered concept because it's really about the staffs that those guys have put together and then how much they've gotten them pulling in the same direction and everything's on the same page intellectually. So Lanning versus Day, that's a fun headline grabber. Will Stein versus Jim Knowles was what it was about last night, and hat tip, Will Stein, huge edge Will Stein. They had an offensive coordinator there named Kenny Dillingham who was good enough that he got himself a head coaching job at Arizona State. And Dan Lanning goes and gets himself a guy by the name of Will Stein, and now Will Stein is on that fast track. And that's a testament. That's kind of one of the telltale signs of a good program when you keep having those coaches in elevation mode. And then the other one was Taj Lupoy / Dan Lanning against Chip Kelly. This was supposed to be an edge for Ohio State, is what I'm telling you. And it wasn't. It wasn't. There was not some decided edge last night. It wasn't like one staff got dunked on by the other staff. But there were some people, not necessarily me. In fact, I don't really talk about this all that much on air. But there were some people who thought that there was a very, very decided coaching staff mismatch in this game, advantage Ohio State. And there really wasn't. There really wasn't. So I thought it validated a lot from an Oregon program perspective on that front as well. So now Oregon looks at themselves and they say, well, we won this game 32-31, raucous environment. I'll talk about that in a second. Boy, will I talk about that in a second. Raucous environment. We had them in our backyard. We won 32-31. Cool. There's a chance we'll see them again. Job's not finished. In fact, they got to go on the road for a Friday night game this week. They got to go to Purdue. And you can chuckle at that all you want to. Bama folks chuckled at going to Nashville to play Vanderbilt as well. So nothing is for sure in college football circa 2024. But how about Ohio State for a second? How did you feel about Ohio State walking away from this game? I think they're a really good team. I had them as my number one team in the country last week. And so coming into this game, I had them number one team in the country. I watch it, and they go on the road, and they lose by 1 point. Now, if I'm an Ohio State fan, I look at that, and I would have a hard knee-jerk reaction. I would not like that my defense had nearly 500 put on it. I would just say Oregon's going to do that to almost anyone. Texas right now statistically has the number one defense in the country. If Oregon faced Texas, I am promising you Texas is not having the kind of mirrored defensive statistical day against Oregon that they've had against the rest of the country. No different than you yesterday, looking at what you've done against the Michigan States and Western Michigans and Rutgers of the world. You haven't faced Rutgers yet. Western Michigans and Akrons of the world. And all of a sudden it looks different against Oregon. Yeah, it sure does, doesn't it? There aren't many Oregons out there. There aren't many two-headed monsters at receiver like they have. There aren't many tailbacks out there. There aren't many Dylan Gabriels out there. And so, yeah, I'd feel that way if I were an Ohio State fan. But I get to just sit here and watch it. And what I watched was a really, really good team. I thought Ohio State put forth an effort last night, albeit flawed, that was good enough to beat like 98% of the teams in the country. It was just they were in a really, really tough spot last night. That's okay. Now you got to earn the right to maybe get a second chance at it. But their defensive line got neutralized, which concerns me. It concerns me because it should be a strength of that team. And when we're talking about a strength of an Ohio State team, all due respect, mountains of respect to Marshall and Purdue and Northwestern, I don't care about those games. I care about those guys showing up and taking over a game against Oregon and taking over a game in a few weeks at Penn State and Indiana this year and Michigan. That's where those guys have to show up. Just flat out have to be better because you're holding yourself to a different standard if you're Ohio State, man. It's not we're playing good enough to win 9 or 10 games and be a fringe 10 seed in the playoff or something like that. And if we don't go to Indy, that's okay. It's not okay. This is the circle year for Ohio State, so that's not okay. Denzel Burke got targeted. I think Oregon felt very good about their guys one-on-one against pretty much anyone in Ohio State's secondary. Just so happened to be number 10, could have been a couple of other guys. I was really surprised at how hard Ohio State shifted away from running the ball. Like, that to me was the entire predicate of this season. And I'm speaking like it's a eulogy. This season's not over. In many ways, it just started last night. You learned a little something about yourself. Now you get to dust yourself off and you dive right back in. Every one of your goals are still in front of you, so I'm not speaking like it sounds like I'm speaking. But something kind of needs to change there, because my feeling on this Ohio State team and why I thought they could win the national championship is coming into it, I felt like they watched what's happened to them at the hands of Michigan the last 3 years. And Ohio State was known for flash at receiver, but really when it came down to it, they weren't above just getting popped in the mouth, which should not happen to Ohio State. So I thought, okay, if I realize that, Ryan Day and his staff have long since realized that, which means they can choose to play any which way they want because they've got the personnel. Might they choose to shift to a style and place a premium on playing a style that is a bit more physical, that is a bit more in your face and maybe a little bit more rock fightish at times than it is, go over the top constantly? Maybe, just maybe, that's the key. And it's less points per game. It's also less points given up per game. But they did it in the first half last night. They run it for 122. They run it for 5.8 yards per carry. That's a nice start to a game. That is halfway to then being in a position where you can kind of take over the game in the second half on the ground. They had 19 yards rushing in the second half, 1.6 yards per carry. And yet still, they get towards the end, and I was there at the Notre Dame game last year, and for a second it didn't look good, but Ohio State has a drive to end the game, and I swear it felt just like that Notre Dame game was happening all over again last night. And then it didn't happen. You can question officiating if you want to. Trust me, I could question officiating both ways in this game. So that's a wash for me. I'm not really going down that road. Just a very, very hard-fought game. Still a lot to play for. But what did I say last Thursday? I said we're really close to that 2007 dream that a lot of people have. The two things that we need to see is we need to see Ohio State look vulnerable. We've seen it. And you needed to see Texas look vulnerable, and we haven't seen that yet. And the reason you need that is because to have a truly chaotic season, you need to have no elite teams. And you need to have it where it doesn't feel like no matter how much chaos there is, we're all funneling towards the same result. Because as long as you have at least one elite team, it feels like you're funneling towards the same result. We'll just see how crazy the winding road is to get there. So Ohio State, no longer invincible. Oregon looks really good, but they've been taken to the wire a couple of times too. Texas is still out there. Shark fin still in the water, and Oklahoma did nothing about that. But this was an incredible game to be at. Okay, so let me talk to you about something. It's time for us to have an honest conversation about this. The Big Ten's loudest stadium is in Eugene, Oregon. This place was out of its mind last night, and there's some people who are pushing back on this. Okay, so I am not going to present myself as the authority on many things, but this I will. Because unlike I'm pretty sure everyone watching this show, I am blessed enough to have stood on the field for the biggest games in all these environments. And I was there last night. This place is louder than any other venue in the Big Ten, including places with 30 and 40,000 more seats capacity than Autzen Stadium has. Now, I found that I got a lot of pushback on that when I floated the theory out there last night when I was doing some post-game stuff on CBS Sports HQ. And when I really dug deeper, you're going to be shocked by this, but when I really dug deeper, the people disagreeing on how loud Autzen is have never been to a game there. Gasp. Can you believe that? Can you believe people would try and speak authoritatively on things they know nothing about? I would doubt it too if I hadn't been there, man. If I'm a Penn State fan or a Michigan fan, Ohio State fan, we're packing 6 figs into our stadium every Saturday. And they got what? They're having to break fire marshal codes to get 60,000 people in that place. I know. I don't care because I've experienced it. Like I was there last night. Ohio State was at times very shaken and very rattled by that environment. And Ohio State's Ohio State, man. They go into very, very big environments. They'll go to State College in a couple of weeks. They deal with this stuff, and they couldn't deal with it last night. 95% of folks who disagreed with me on this had just flat out never been there. I knew Autzen Stadium would do itself very proud on national TV, perfect weather conditions, huge recruiting weekend, just a spectacle for the sport. I didn't doubt that, but they surpassed even my expectations. So if you guys want to doubt me on this, doubt me, but make sure you yourself go to a game there. Make sure it's a big Saturday. And make sure your team gets out of there with a win before you start to run your mouth about these sorts of things. Because I will tell you this, I would like you to poll some of your Ohio State brethren who traveled very well. They traveled very well to Eugene. Ask them how loud or not loud it was in there. Ask an Ohio State offensive lineman, if you can get to him today, how loud or not loud it was in there. So, again, many things were said about Oregon coming into the Big Ten and how Oregon would have to adjust this and deal with that. And it was true. It was also greatly overblown. And in reality, the Big Ten, even at the very top, is finding we have to adjust to Oregon a little bit as well. I don't know if we'll see these two teams play again, because this is not a clear two-team race, no matter what the casual college football media will tell you today. This is not clear-cut. It is not that clear-cut yet. I watched them play last night. I think it's the two best teams in the Big Ten. It is not that clear-cut yet. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, what a Friday we had up there. What a Friday. I went up there early. We got there late Thursday night, actually. Went over to the Warsaw Sports Business Center Friday and spoke to, I don't know how many people we had in the class, but it was really good. We've been doing this now. We've done this the last several weeks. The campus that we go to, I'll just be hit up by maybe journalism or maybe business or whomstever, and I'll just go do a Q&A. This is really fun. This is like next to the game, clearly the most fun thing that I do all week. And I got asked about everything from business and passion integrating into one another to Connor Stallions. I got asked everything under the sun, and no holds barred, almost. So appreciate them. Appreciate the Oregon staff up there. Everybody making us feel at home, and really great access that we get up there. And then to top it all off, I know a lot of you are listening on podcast, and this is one of those times where you've just got to miss out a little bit. Director Colin is rolling real-life footage shot from the iJosh last night. We were part of yet another field storming. And I got to tell you, some of you are 70 years old and you've been Oregon fans your whole lives. Some of you are students, and you may be on the screen as we speak. For those of you who fit the latter category, I hope you understand how special last night was. You get one of those per lifetime on average. Many fans never experience a situation like you found yourselves in last night. For everything to come together like that, for everything to be that perfect, oftentimes that's the stuff that they base movies on. Oftentimes that's the stuff they put in movies, and you watch it and you say, that's a little bit too fantastical to be real life. Last night was your movie. Last night was cinema there at Autzen Stadium in Eugene, Oregon. We were so happy to be there.